Welcome to the audiobook of The Great Housing Hijack. This section is called 5 Housing Market Equilibria, Chapter 5, Spatial Equilibrium, Why Location Matters. Here's a quote. Savvy homebuyers could save themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars by looking just a few minutes up the road, with neighbouring suburbs often offering the same lifestyle for less. Expanding their search to bridesmaid suburbs could have the added benefit of allowing buyers to get into the market while they could still afford to, without compromising on their lifestyle. End quote. Real estate investors know that nearby suburbs can't sustain a large price gap for long, and that quote was from Alana Frost in a 2021 article on realestate.com about Melbourne's bridesmaid suburbs. Let's get into the chapter. In 2005, rents were rising in my hometown of Brisbane. To avoid this cost to my meagre 23-year-old's budget, I considered buying a cheap boat and living in it on the Brisbane River. I went to inspect a few of the cheapest livable boats I could find to investigate the cost of this option. If it worked, it would get me an inner-city location at a fraction of the cost, but with the trade-off of far less comfort. Instead, I took the alternative, which was to shift one extra suburb away from the city and the locations I needed to regularly visit. I moved to a bridesmaid suburb, adding a little cost and time to my daily routine, but saving on rent. I wasn't the only one thinking this way. Jonathan Sriranganathan was elected as my local councillor in 2016. Before being elected, he had lived in a share house, but he took the opposite decision to me and moved into a houseboat after being elected. For him, the added inconvenience of living on a boat was worth the cost saving compared with renting a house nearby. Why am I telling you this? Because although I didn't know it then, the actions of both Jonathan and myself are among the many mechanisms by which housing markets adjust towards a spatial equilibrium. This is the third housing market equilibrium and, in my view, provides the most powerful insights into housing markets. If you have ever moved house, you'll appreciate its logic. This section's called Where We Live and Work. Spatial equilibrium is the idea that moving equalizes quality of life. Put a different way, all locations are substitutes at the right price. If this wasn't the case, people would be better off by voluntarily moving. In the lingo, there would be a spatial or locational arbitrage opportunity and people would move to take advantage of it. Spatial equilibrium adds a crucial spatial or locational dimension to the other housing market equilibria. Rents and asset prices vary enormously across locations, for example, as does the density of housing and the rate of new housing development. It is not just the level of rent on average, but the rental gradient between locations that is an equilibrium market outcome. Recall the checkout queue analogy. The spatial equilibrium is the difference in price that someone at the front of the checkout queue would charge for giving up their spot compared to those further back in the queue. The rental equilibrium reflects only the average level of those prices. Usually, a central location in major cities is the most attractive from a transport accessibility perspective. Here, there is the shortest distance to everywhere else in the city. This location is like the person at the front of the checkout queue who has the shortest waiting time. This is why larger employers prefer central city locations. The town centre usually has the biggest commutable catchment of workers. If a business chose to locate on the northern outskirts of a city, people living in the south would not work there because the commute would be twice as far for them, compared to the business being in the centre of the city. It is not just work commute times that make the city centre more accessible. Travel times are shorter to social events, schools, sporting events, museums, nightlife, grocery and specialty stores, and more. These activities cluster in the centre because it is most accessible to their customers, and people cluster close by because they desire accessibility to these activities, resulting in a higher value for these locations. In the economic lingo, this clustering leading to an increased value is called the agglomeration effect. As well as accessibility benefits, local amenity is a major determinant of the desirability of a location. Suburbs with fewer services, crumbling local infrastructure, bad schools, and few recreation options are less desirable and hence less valuable. As my good mate and planning professor Peter Phibbs would say, if you want to make rents cheaper, set a few cars on fire in the street, that should do it. The joke gets at the core insight from spatial equilibrium. Any policy change that makes housing rents in a city cheaper in the long run only does so by making it a worse place to live. This was a free sample of the audiobook of The Great Housing Hijack. To get full access, sign up as a paid subscriber at fresheconomicthinking.com.